The first warning came not from satellites or deep space monitoring stations, but from a series of inexplicable quantum fluctuations detected by Dr. Marcus Rodriguez's personal research array. He'd always been an outlier, a xenolinguist with an obsession for impossible communications, more comfortable with theoretical alien language matrices than with his fellow humans. The quantum anomaly flickered across his holographic display like a cancerous growth, eating through established physical laws. Marcus's fingers danced across the interface, isolating the signal. Most would have dismissed it as background noise, but he knew better. This was a signature, a deliberate message encoded in the very fabric of space-time. 3 days earlier, he'd been ridiculed at the International Xenolinguistic Conference in New Geneva. His presentation on potential non-linear communication methods had been met with patronizing chuckles and thinly veiled academic contempt. Dr. Elena Sharma, head of the Interstellar Communication Institute, had been particularly brutal. Rodriguez, dreams of conversations with ghosts, she'd sneered, her augmented reality presentation dissolving the holographic models of his research. Quantum linguistics is nothing more than mathematical poetry. Show me a single verified extraterrestrial communication, and I'll eat my doctorate. Now those words would come back to haunt her. The quantum signal began to resolve into something more tangible. Marcus's custom-built quantum decryption matrix, a device he'd spent years developing in near-total secrecy, started to parse impossible layers of information. It wasn't just a signal. It was a message, a warning, a challenge. In the United Nations First Contact Chamber, a massive circular room designed to look both intimidating and welcoming to potential alien visitors, the morning briefing was proceeding with bureaucratic tedium. Military strategists, diplomatic corps representatives, and scientific advisors sat in concentric rings, discussing hypothetical first contact scenarios that they never truly believed would happen. Marcus burst through the reinforced doors, his augmented reality display projecting a holographic nightmare that immediately silenced the room. "They're here," he announced, his voice a mix of terror and exhilaration. "And they're not here to talk." The holographic display showed something that defied conventional understanding. A massive biomechanical structure was materializing at the edge of the solar system, not through traditional faster-than-light travel, but by literally warping the fabric of space around it. The object wasn't just large, it was impossible. General Catherine Chen, head of Earth's Unified Defense Command, was the first to recover. "Explain," she demanded, her cybernetic eye already running tactical analysis protocols. Marcus's hands moved across his interface, revealing layers of data that made no sense. "It's not a ship," he said. "It's a living communication device. The entire structure is a message, a very specific message." The first explosion ripped through the chamber moments later. Reinforced walls designed to withstand multiple simultaneous nuclear strikes buckled like paper. Holoscreens shattered, raining crystalline fragments across panicked diplomats and military personnel. Marcus dove behind an overturned conference table, his archaeological linguistics datapad still clutched in his hand. Around him, chaos erupted. Military personnel activated defense protocols. Automated defense systems began charging, targeting systems that had no clear point of origin for the attack. But Marcus saw something else. Between the quantum fluctuations and the physical destruction, a pattern was emerging. This wasn't a random attack. It was a test, a brutal, calculated examination of humanity's response and capabilities. As alarms blared and emergency protocols activated, Marcus began deciphering the alien communication that no one else could comprehend. The language wasn't spoken or written. It was constructed through quantum interactions, biological resonances, and mathematical constructs that would drive a traditional linguist mad. Most critically, Marcus realized they were hunting, not for resources, not for territory. They were searching for something specific, or someone. His own genetic history, a complex tapestry of mixed heritage and unexplained biological anomalies, began to pulse with an uncomfortable resonance. The attack wasn't just a first contact scenario. It was a highly targeted operation with a very specific objective. Outside the chamber, the first waves of alien probes began to penetrate Earth's atmosphere. They weren't weapons, precisely. They were more like biological sampling devices, scanning and cataloging with terrifying efficiency. Marcus Rodriguez, the researcher who'd been mocked, marginalized, and dismissed, now found himself at the absolute center of humanity's most critical moment. The quantum signal continued to resolve, revealing a message that would change everything. First contact was here, and nothing would ever be the same. The emergency bunker beneath the United Nations headquarters was a marvel of human engineering, a labyrinth of reinforced quantum-shielded chambers designed to withstand everything from nuclear attacks to electromagnetic pulse weapons. But as Empress Krixala's holographic form materialized, even this sanctuary felt impossibly fragile. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the center of a circular chamber, surrounded by the most powerful humans on the planet. General Catherine Chen's cybernetic eye flickered with tactical overlays. UN Secretary General Amara Okoro's hands were clenched so tightly, her augmented bone structure threatened to crack. The world's top geneticists, linguists, and military strategists formed a ring around Marcus, treating him simultaneously as both their greatest asset and most vulnerable liability. Krixala was not what anyone expected. Her holographic projection wasn't a simplistic alien representation. It was a living, breathing manifestation of biological complexity that defied human comprehension. Her form shifted constantly, exoskeleton plates that moved like liquid metal, neural tendrils that branched and reconnected in impossible geometric patterns, colors that seemed to exist beyond the human visual spectrum. When she spoke, the sound wasn't just heard, it was experienced, a multidimensional communication that resonated through bone, neural pathway, and quantum probability. Humanity, the translation matrix, struggled to capture the nuance. You stand at the precipice of extinction or transcendence. Marcus's linguistic implant worked overtime, parsing layers of meaning that went far beyond simple words. The Jareen didn't just communicate, they constructed entire narratives through quantum entanglement, biological resonance, and mathematical constructs that would drive a traditional linguist insane. One human, Krixala continued, her form now resembling a fractal representation of biological potential, will determine the fate of your entire species. General Chen stepped forward, her cybernetic systems preparing defensive protocols. State. Your terms, she demanded. The Empress's response was both a threat and an invitation. Humanity would provide a singular genetic donor, a biological consort who would participate in a reproductive ritual that was part genetic exchange, part cultural assimilation, part evolutionary test. The chosen individual would be Marcus Rodriguez. Your genetic structure, Krixala's communication matrix revealed, contains anomalies that make you uniquely compatible with our reproductive strategies. The room erupted into chaos. Geneticists pulled up Marcus's medical records. Military strategists ran quantum probability simulations. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a diplomatic exchange. It was a fundamental challenge to human sovereignty. Dr. Elena Sharma, the same researcher who had mocked Marcus's earlier work, now studied his genetic profile with a mix of terror and scientific fascination. His DNA was a complex tapestry that defied traditional understanding. Multiple genetic markers that should have been incompatible coexisted in his genome. Generations of mixed heritage had created something unprecedented. If we refuse? Secretary General Okoro's voice was steady, but Marcus could detect the quantum-level fear resonating through her words. Krixala's response was brutally simple. The holographic display transformed, showing multiple projection models. Cities would be reduced to quantum foam. Entire continental masses would be restructured at the molecular level. It wasn't just destruction. It was a complete biological reconfiguration that would erase humanity's very existence. You misunderstand, Marcus interrupted, his linguistic implant parsing layers of meaning that others couldn't comprehend. This isn't a threat. It's a test. The room went silent. His years of xenolinguistic research had prepared him for this moment. The Jareen weren't looking for a simple genetic exchange. They were seeking something far more complex, a way to assess a species' evolutionary potential. "I'll do it," Marcus announced, shocking everyone in the room. General Chen's cybernetic systems flared with warning protocols. "You can't be serious," she warned. But Marcus understood something no one else did. The ultimatum wasn't a choice between marriage and war. It was an opportunity to turn the tables on the most advanced civilization humanity had ever encountered. The quantum communication matrix surrounding Krixala's holographic form began to pulse with what could only be described as anticipation. Humanity's representative had been chosen. The true test was about to begin. As the holographic empress faded, leaving behind a complex mathematical signature that would take years to fully decode, Marcus Rodriguez allowed himself the smallest of smiles. They thought they were selecting a genetic donor. They had no idea they were choosing a weapon. The Black Site Laboratory was a nightmare of bleeding-edge technology and controlled chaos. Located beneath the Atacama Desert, it was humanity's most secret research facility, a place where the impossible was just another Tuesday morning experiment. Dr. Rear. Marcus Rodriguez worked with a fury that bordered on madness, surrounded by a team that was equal parts brilliant and unhinged. To his left, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum geneticist with 3 Nobel Prizes and a reputation for destroying conventional scientific understanding, manipulated holographic DNA structures that seemed to dance and breathe. "We're not just preparing a defense," Marcus muttered, his fingers flying across quantum-entangled interfaces. "We're writing a biological revolution." The team was a carefully curated collection of humanity's most unconventional minds. There was Dr. Carlos Reyes, a computational biologist who'd been kicked out of 3 major research institutions for dangerous theoretical work. Beside him, Dr. Aisha Okoye, a linguistic quantum theorist who claimed she could read genetic code like poetry. Their mission was insane. They were going to turn Marcus's own genetic structure into a weapon of mass biological disruption. Historical records of Marcus's family were a geneticist's fever dream. His maternal grandmother was a Chilean-Japanese hybrid who'd survived multiple environmental catastrophes. His paternal lineage traced back to a complex mix of West African, European, and indigenous Brazilian bloodlines. Generations of survival, adaptation, and unexpected resilience had created something unique. "Look at this," Dr. Tanaka announced, her holographic display revealing layers of genetic complexity that defied traditional understanding. Marcus's genome wasn't just diverse. It was a living record of human adaptability. Genetic markers that should have been incompatible coexisted in impossible harmony. Dormant sequences that most humans carried as evolutionary remnants were active and dynamic in his DNA. The quantum computer, a machine so advanced it was almost a living entity, began to model potential genetic scenarios. Each simulation was more impossible than the last. They weren't just preparing a defensive mechanism. They were constructing a biological algorithm designed to challenge the fundamental understanding of genetic exchange. "The Jareen think they're choosing a genetic donor," Marcus explained to his team. "They have no idea they're selecting a Trojan horse." Dr. Reyes brought up a simulation that made the room go silent. The genetic sequence they were developing wasn't just a defensive mechanism. It was a complex adaptive program that could potentially rewrite the basic understanding of biological information transfer. "We're talking about a genetic sequence that doesn't just defend," Reyes said, his voice a mix of scientific excitement and existential terror. "We're creating a mechanism that can potentially transform an entire alien genetic collective from the inside." The implications were staggering. Traditional warfare was about destruction. What they were developing was a form of biological jujitsu, using the enemy's own systems against them. General Catherine Chen arrived, her cybernetic systems interfacing directly with the laboratory's quantum network. Her presence was a reminder that this was more than a scientific experiment. This was humanity's last potential defense against total extinction. "How certain are you?" she demanded. Marcus turned, his eyes reflecting holographic genetic models that seemed to pulse with living intelligence. Certain enough that the Jareen won't know what hit them, uncertain enough to keep everyone on their toes. The genetic sequence they were developing was a masterpiece of biological complexity. It contained layers of adaptive mechanisms that could respond to different biological environments, sections of code that could potentially rewrite neural pathways, genetic markers that could trigger unexpected evolutionary responses. Dr. Okoye's linguistic analysis added another layer of complexity. She was encoding communication patterns into the genetic sequence itself, a way of transmitting cultural and cognitive information through pure biological medium. "We're not just preparing a genetic defense," she explained. "We're creating a language of survival encoded at the molecular level." As the final simulations ran, the team realized they were doing something unprecedented. They weren't just preparing for first contact. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of biological interaction. The quantum computer's final model appeared, a genetic sequence so complex it seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. Marcus Rodriguez understood something fundamental. In that moment, the Jareen thought they were choosing a genetic donor. Humanity was preparing to launch its most sophisticated weapon, itself. The chamber defied every known law of physical space. Suspended between dimensions, the genetic bonding site was a living construct that pulsed with biological mathematics beyond human comprehension. Massive biomechanical tendrils extended from the Jareen ship, creating a neural interface that would have liquefied any other human's brain in microseconds. Marcus Rodriguez stood completely still. Quantum-shielded biosuits lined with experimental neural dampeners covered his body. A last-minute intervention by Dr. Yuki Tanaka that was equal parts brilliant engineering and pure scientific desperation. Embedded within the suit's molecular structure were the genetic sequences they had spent months developing. Each thread was a potential weapon, each fiber a complex communication matrix. Empress Crixala's form materialized, no longer a holographic projection, but a physical manifestation that defied biological understanding. She was simultaneously a living organism and a sophisticated technological construct. Exoskeletal plates shifted like liquid mercury, neural tendrils branching in fractal patterns that hurt the human eye to comprehend. The ritual begins. Her communication matrix resonated through quantum frequencies. Marcus knew this was more than a genetic exchange. This was a comprehensive biological assessment, a method by which the Jareen evaluated potential species for assimilation or elimination. Generations of their civilization had been built on these genetic rituals, a process that had allowed them to dominate entire galactic sectors. They had no idea what was coming. The first neural tendril touched Marcus's biosuit. Immediately, complex quantum algorithms embedded in the suit's structure began their elaborate dance. What should have been a simple genetic sampling became a multi-dimensional information exchange. Dr. Tanaka's voice echoed through a quantum-encrypted communication channel. Activation sequence initiated. Remember, this isn't just defense, this is total information warfare. The neural interface began to penetrate Marcus's protective layers. Most biological organisms would have been instantly overwhelmed, but Marcus was anything but most organisms. The genetic sequences developed in the Black Site laboratory were now activating, complex adaptive algorithms disguised as simple genetic markers. Empress Crixala's neural tendrils began to process what she thought was a standard genetic profile. Instead, she was receiving a carefully constructed biological algorithm designed to do far more than simply resist. It was meant to transform. The first layer was pure misdirection. Genetic markers that appeared to be standard human DNA began to unfold, presenting a seemingly straightforward genetic structure that would pass initial Jareen scanning protocols. But buried within those markers were complex adaptive sequences that were beginning to activate. Marcus allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The Jareen had chosen him specifically because of his unique genetic heritage. Generations of mixed ancestry had created a genome that was fundamentally unpredictable. Each chromosome was a potential battlefield, each gene a strategic asset. As the neural interface deepened, Marcus began to feel the full complexity of the Jareen genetic assessment. It wasn't just an examination, it was a comprehensive invasion of biological privacy, probing not just his physical structure, but generations of genetic memory. They were searching for something: weakness, potential, a way to categorize and control. They would find something entirely different. The first wave of adaptive genetic sequences began to activate. They weren't designed to fight. They were designed to communicate, to introduce concepts of individual agency, creative chaos, and adaptive thinking that were entirely foreign to the Jareen collective consciousness. Dr. Carlos Reyes's voice crackled through the quantum channel. Biological translation matrix is holding. They have no idea what's happening. The neural tendrils began to react in unexpected ways. Sections of the biomechanical interface started to shift, responding to genetic information that defied their comprehension. What should have been a simple genetic assessment was becoming something far more complex. Empress Krigzala's form began to destabilize. The neural tendrils that had been so precise, so controlled, now moved with an unexpected randomness. Quantum fluctuations began to appear, small at first, then growing in complexity and frequency. Marcus was no longer just a genetic donor. He was becoming a virus of individual potential. Initiate secondary cascade, he subvocalized, activating. The next phase of their elaborate biological strategy. The ritual was transforming, and nothing would ever be the same. The Jareen had chosen to test humanity. They had no idea they were about to be tested in return. The neural interface erupted in a cascade of impossible biological reactions. Dr. Yuki Tanaka watched from the quantum-shielded monitoring station, her breath caught between scientific excitement and existential terror. The holographic displays showed something no human had ever witnessed before: a living, breathing battle fought at the molecular level. Marcus Rodriguez's genetic sequence was not just a defensive mechanism. It was a weaponized form of biological communication, a virus of potential that spread through the Jareen systems like wildfire through dry grass. Quantum cascade is stabilizing, Dr. Carlos Reyes muttered, his fingers dancing across interfaces that looked more like living organisms than computer systems. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part was how the genetic sequence was behaving. Most biological weapons were designed to destroy. This was something entirely different. Marcus's carefully engineered DNA was introducing complex packets of information, not just genetic code, but entire conceptual frameworks that the Jareen collective consciousness had never encountered. Individual agency, creative chaos. The fundamental right to self-determination. These were not just abstract concepts. They were weaponized as pure genetic information. Sections of the massive biomechanical warship began to transform. Neural pathways that had existed in perfect hierarchical synchronization for millennia started to develop unexpected branches. Collective decision-making algorithms began to fracture, introducing variables that the Jareen had never considered possible. It's like watching a hive mind discover individuality in real time, Dr. Aisha Okoye whispered, her linguistic quantum algorithms tracking the communication patterns. The Jareen had built their entire civilization on a model of perfect genetic conformity. Their reproductive and social structures were based on complete collective unity. Marcus's genetic sequence was a targeted disruption of everything they understood about biological interaction. Empress Krigzala's control, millennia of rigid matriarchal structure, began to crumble from within. Each section of the biomechanical fleet started to respond differently. Some neural clusters became more aggressive, others more contemplative. It was as if millions of individual consciousnesses were simultaneously awakening, each discovering its own potential for the first time. "We're not just fighting," Marcus's voice came through the quantum communication channel. "We're teaching." The genetic warfare was a language lesson written in the most fundamental code possible, DNA itself. Dr. Tanaka brought up a visualization that made the entire research team go silent. The Jarine's genetic structure was literally rewriting itself. Sections of code that had been dormant for generations were now activating. Evolutionary potential that had been suppressed by collective control was exploding into existence. They thought they were conducting a simple genetic assessment, General Catherine Chen observed, her cybernetic systems parsing the data. They have no idea they're experiencing a fundamental revolution. The neural interface continued to spread. What should have been a localized genetic exchange was now a full-scale conceptual invasion. The Jarine were experiencing something beyond invasion. They were learning the most dangerous lesson any collective could learn: the value of the individual. Sections of the biomechanical fleet began to break away, not through physical separation, but through conceptual divergence. Neural pathways that had once moved in perfect synchronization now developed unexpected variations. Decision-making algorithms introduced variables of personal choice, of potential disagreement. Quantum drift is increasing, Reyes announced. They're developing something close to individual consciousness. Marcus's genetic sequence was more than a weapon. It was a vaccine against collective suppression. Each strand of DNA carried not just biological information, but entire philosophical frameworks, concepts of freedom, of choice, of potential. The Jarine had chosen to test humanity's genetic potential. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not in its physical capabilities, but in its capacity for fundamental transformation. As the genetic cascade continued, Dr. Okoye made an observation that sent chills through the research team. "We're not just fighting an alien civilization," she said, her voice a mix of scientific wonder and philosophical revelation. "We're teaching them what it means to be truly alive." The neural interface pulsed with new potential. The genetic war had begun. The Jarine collective consciousness began to fracture like quantum-entangled glass. Sections of the massive biomechanical fleet started to diverge, not through physical separation, but through a more fundamental transformation of their collective identity. What began as a targeted genetic exchange was now a full-scale evolutionary uprising that defied every established principle of the Jarine civilization. Dr. Yuki Tanaka watched the progression with a mixture of scientific wonder and existential awe. Her quantum monitoring system struggled to capture the complexity of what was unfolding. This was more than a biological invasion. It was a conceptual revolution transmitted through the most fundamental language of life itself. "We're witnessing the birth of individual consciousness," she muttered, her fingers dancing across interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Marcus didn't just introduce a genetic sequence. He's teaching an entire civilization what it means to be an individual. The first signs of rebellion appeared in the most unexpected places. Biomechanical maintenance units, once perfect synchronized extensions of the collective will, began to develop micro-variations in their operational protocols. A maintenance drone responsible for neural pathway repair would suddenly pause, its algorithmic decision-making process introducing a moment of what could only be described as contemplation. In the central command nexus of the primary Jarine warship, Empress Kursala experienced the first true moment of individual uncertainty in her millennia-long existence. The genetic sequence introduced by Marcus Rodriguez was more than a biological intrusion. It was a comprehensive assault on the very concept of collective consciousness. Quantum communication channels that had once moved with perfect synchronization now developed unexpected harmonics. Information began to flow in patterns that were not just different, but fundamentally unpredictable. The Jarine were experiencing something they had no framework to understand: individual potential. "Quantum drift is accelerating," Dr. Carlos Reyes announced, his voice a mix of scientific excitement and philosophical revelation. "They're not just changing, they're evolving in real time." The rebellion spread like a living algorithm. Each section of the biomechanical fleet began to develop its own unique response to the genetic invasion. Some neural clusters became more contemplative, introducing concepts of philosophical inquiry. Others developed unexpected creative potential, generating solution matrices that defied their previous collective programming. General Catherine Chen's cybernetic systems parsed the incoming data with increasing fascination. This isn't just a biological attack, she observed. It's a comprehensive system of conceptual liberation. Entire sections of the Jareen fleet began to break away, not through physical movement, but through conceptual divergence. Neural pathways that had moved in perfect synchronization for millennia now developed unexpected variations. Decision-making. Algorithms introduced variables of personal choice, of potential disagreement. Dr. Aisha Okoye tracked the linguistic implications of the genetic transformation. They're developing something closer to individual communication, she explained. Imagine a civilization that spent millennia speaking a single perfect language suddenly discovering the potential for individual dialects. The genetic sequence Marcus had introduced was a sophisticated form of conceptual warfare. Each strand of DNA carried not just biological information, but entire philosophical frameworks. Concepts of freedom, of choice, of potential. The Jareen were experiencing the most dangerous and transformative lesson any collective could learn: the value of individual agency. Empress Krigzala's control began to disintegrate. The perfect hierarchical structure that had defined Jareen, civilization for countless generations, was collapsing under the weight of newly discovered individual potential. Neural clusters that had once moved with perfect synchronization now developed unexpected branches of thought, of potential, of possibility. We're not just fighting an alien civilization. Marcus's voice came through the quantum communication channel. We're teaching them what it means to be truly alive. The transformation was total and irreversible. The Jareen were experiencing a fundamental reimagining of their entire existential framework. Collective consciousness was giving way to something far more complex, a living, breathing ecosystem of individual potential. Dr. Tanaka made an observation that sent chills through the research team. "This isn't just a genetic invasion," she said. "This is a comprehensive system of conceptual liberation." As the genetic cascade continued, the Jareen fleet transformed. What had once been a perfect, synchronized machine became a living, breathing ecosystem of individual potential. Neural pathways developed unexpected variations. Decision-making algorithms introduced variables of personal choice. The Jareen had chosen to test humanity's genetic potential. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not in its physical capabilities, but in its capacity for fundamental transformation. The rebellion had spread, and nothing would ever be the same. The diplomatic chamber was unlike any negotiation space in human or Jareen history. Suspended in quantum-stabilized space, it existed simultaneously as a physical location and a complex mathematical construct. Marcus Rodriguez stood at its center, surrounded by holographic representations that shifted between biological and technological manifestations. Empress Kurizala was no longer a singular entity. The genetic transformation had fractured her collective consciousness into something unprecedented, a living, breathing negotiation of individual potentials. Humanity, the communication matrix, struggled to capture the complexity of her new state, has challenged everything we understand about collective existence. Marcus understood this was more than a simple diplomatic exchange. This was a high-stakes, evolutionary chess match with the fate of entire civilizations hanging in the balance. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's voice echoed through a quantum-encrypted channel. The genetic cascade has created something entirely new. They're not just negotiating. They're experiencing a fundamental reimagining of their entire civilization. The Jareen delegation was a living testament to the transformation. Where once stood a perfectly synchronized collective, now existed a diverse array of individual consciousness. Some neural clusters appeared aggressive, others contemplative. Quantum communication channels buzzed with unexpected variations, individual perspectives that had never existed before. General Catherine Chen studied the holographic displays, her cybernetic systems parsing layers of information that defied traditional diplomatic protocols. "They're discovering individual potential in real time," she observed. "Our genetic sequence wasn't just a weapon. It was a form of evolutionary education." Marcus stepped forward, the carefully engineered genetic sequences still resonating within his cellular structure. He was both negotiator and living weapon, a bridge between two fundamentally different forms of intelligence. "You sought to assess humanity's potential," Marcus announced, his linguistic matrix translating complex quantum communications. "Instead, you've discovered something far more important." The chamber itself seemed to pulse with potential. Quantum fluctuations danced between technological and biological manifestations, a physical representation of the transformation occurring within the Jareen collective. Dr. Aisha Okoye tracked the linguistic implications of the negotiation. "They're developing a completely new form of communication," she reported. "It's not just about exchanging information. It's about experiencing individual perspective." Empress Krizala's form continued to shift. No longer a singular entity, but a complex negotiation of emerging individual consciousnesses. The perfect, hierarchical structure that had defined Jareen civilization for millennia was collapsing under the weight of newly discovered potential. "We did not seek to destroy you," one aspect of her consciousness communicated. "We sought to understand." Marcus allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "And now you understand something far more important than genetic compatibility." The diplomatic chamber became a living battlefield of evolutionary potential. Each moment was a negotiation not just between species, but between fundamentally different concepts of existence. The Jareen were experiencing the most dangerous and transformative lesson any collective could learn: the value of individual agency. "Your genetic sequence," another aspect of Krixala's consciousness communicated, "has introduced a form of complexity we cannot comprehend." "That," Marcus responded, "is precisely the point." Dr. Carlos Reyes's quantum analysis systems worked overtime, tracking the incredible transformation. "They're not just changing," he muttered. "They're evolving in real time. Each moment is a negotiation of potential." The stakes were beyond simple territorial or resource conflicts. This was a fundamental challenge to the entire understanding of collective existence. Humanity had not just defended itself. It had introduced a revolutionary concept of individual potential to a civilization that had never conceived of such a thing. Sections of the Jareen delegation began to develop unexpected communication patterns. Some argued for continued conflict. Others were fascinated by the new potential for individual experience. The perfect synchronization was gone, replaced by something far more complex and unpredictable. "We offer not conquest," Marcus announced, "but the opportunity to discover something more important than collective control." The quantum-stabilized chamber pulsed with potential. Holographic representations shifted and transformed, a physical manifestation of the incredible negotiation occurring at the most fundamental level of existence. Empress Krixala, or what remained of the concept of a singular empress, reached a decision that would transform their entire civilization. Humanity had not just survived. It had taught an entire species what it means to be truly alive. The negotiation continued, and nothing would ever be the same. 5 years after the genetic revolution, the galaxy looked nothing like anyone had expected. The Jareen, once a monolithic, terrifyingly unified collective, now existed as a vibrant, chaotic ecosystem of individual potential. Where once stood a perfect, synchronized civilization, now existed a complex network of emerging cultures, individual perspectives, and unprecedented creativity. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the interspecies diplomatic station, watching the latest generation of transformed Jareen navigate their newfound individuality. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood beside him, her quantum analysis systems still struggling to comprehend the full extent of their evolutionary intervention. "We didn't just change a civilization," Tanaka muttered. "We birthed an entirely new form of collective existence." The transformation had been total and irreversible. Those first genetic sequences, carefully engineered in the Black Site laboratory, had introduced something far more profound than a simple biological invasion. They had taught an entire species the concept of individual potential. Jareen ships now moved with an unpredictability that would have been impossible in their previous collective state. Some pursued scientific exploration, others artistic expression, while others engaged in complex philosophical debates that spanned entire star systems. The perfect synchronization was gone, replaced by something far more dynamic and alive. General Catherine Chen's latest reports confirmed what the scientific community had long suspected. The genetic cascade had not just transformed the Jareen. It had fundamentally altered the entire galactic understanding of collective intelligence. Individual potential is now the most valuable resource in the known universe, Chen had reported in her last diplomatic briefing. And humanity introduced it like a quantum virus. Marcus watched as a group of young Jareen, each displaying unique coloration and neural pattern configurations, discussed a complex mathematical theory. Their communication was a dance of individual perspectives, a far cry from the perfect synchronization of their ancestors. Dr. Aisha Okoye's linguistic analysis had become the foundation of a new field of interspecies communication. The genetic sequence that had started as a defensive mechanism was now studied as a form of revolutionary communication, a way of introducing individual potential to collective systems. "We didn't conquer," Marcus often explained to diplomatic students. "We invited an entire civilization to discover what it means to be truly alive." The technological exchange had been unprecedented. Jareen biomechanical technologies, once a perfect synchronized system, now developed in wildly creative directions. Some focused on artistic expression, others on scientific innovation. The collective had become a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. Dr. Carlos Reyes had dedicated his entire research to tracking the evolutionary implications. "It's not just about individual consciousness," he would explain. "It's about the potential for collective growth through individual perspective." Humanity's role in the galaxy had transformed. No longer seen as a potential threat, humans were now viewed as evolutionary catalysts, a species capable of introducing fundamental change at the most basic level of existence. The genetic sequence that had started as a defensive mechanism was now studied in every major educational institution across known space. It was a testament to the power of individual potential, of creative chaos, of the fundamental right to self-determination. Empress Krigzala, or rather, the complex network of individual consciousnesses that had emerged from the former collective, had become a key diplomatic partner. Their negotiations were no longer about conquest or control, but about the potential for mutual understanding. "Humanity gave us the most dangerous gift possible," one aspect of the collective communication would explain. "The ability to disagree, to be different, to grow." The Black Site Laboratory had become a legendary location, a place where the most fundamental transformation in galactic history had been engineered. Not through weapons, not through conquest, but through the simple introduction of individual potential. Marcus Rodriguez understood something fundamental. Their intervention had been more than a defensive strategy. It had been an invitation to discover the most powerful force in the universe, the potential of individual consciousness. As the observation deck's quantum windows showed the complex dance of Jareen ships, each moving with its own unique trajectory, Dr. Tanaka made an observation that captured the entire transformation. "We didn't just change a civilization," she said, her voice a mix of scientific wonder and philosophical revelation. "We showed an entire species what it means to be truly alive." The genetic cascade continued. The revolution had just begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.